All right, and we are live. How's it going? I see we already have about 6 or 7 people in the house. Thank you so much for joining in tonight, and I'm sure a lot more are going to join in as the evening goes on. I'm really excited. Tonight we have Paul Hales in the house, and we're going to talk about some of his wicked, awesome speakers with pro audio technology and theory. Uh, just really cool stuff. I wish everybody out there could experience what I've been able to hear when I've heard these things or his products demoed at shows because they just sound so good. So we're going to dig into a lot of that coming up. But first, I just want to go through a couple house cleaning things. First off, over on AV Nirvana, we are just coming up on having 61,000 registered members, part of our community. Um, so thank you so much to everyone that has been around and joined the community. If you're not a member, come on over and register. It's totally free, and you can become part of, I would say, the friendliest audio and home theater enthusiast community on the net. We also host the official help forum for uh, Room EQ Wizard. And also over on YouTube, we are super close to 10,000 subscribers. Over the last 2 years, Travis Ballstat and I have been making a big effort on the YouTube front. And since we, let's see, I think over the last month, so pretty much since we've been posting all of our Cedia videos, we've had about 120,000 hours of view time. So super excited about that. And I see someone is asking about audio. I do believe, yes, we do have audio live. So MW, you might want to check your speaker settings there and see if they're on. But anyway, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Come over, become a member at our forum. And also just want to let you all know we have a giveaway going on right now. The folks at Klipsch are working with us. We are giving away one of their Flexus Core 200 soundbars. That's a $500 value. You can register for that over on our website. And also there is a secret code, I should say, of how you can get an extra free entry in our most recent home theater news review podcast. So with that, I would like to bring on our guest. Paul, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Todd.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, a little backstory to one of the reasons why we're doing this. Paul and I chatted on the show floor at Cedia, and I lost the interview. And I thought we had a really great talk, and so I was disappointed, Paul, that got eaten by the digital. I would call them the digital dog gods, maybe.
Yeah, don't worry about it. We'll make up for it tonight. So
For sure. It's exciting times. As we were just chatting off camera, it's definitely a hectic environment. I know you're just running ragged the entire time. You're basically doing uh, demos, it looks like every 30 minutes throughout the day. Is that right?
I did back-to-back demos every 30 minutes with no break, right? We had just like a minute at the end of the first session and another minute to get the people in and out. And so I think I did 43 demos back to back over 3 days. So that's why, you mentioned that we could show PowerPoint or whatever, but I'm so done with PowerPoints after doing that 43 times in 3 days. I'm not going to do that today, but yeah, it is crazy busy for sure. And that's because we have to get everybody in. And when we talked in 2023, we had a problem. We couldn't get everybody in. So we cut the demo length in half and did twice as many and added a bunch of seats. And so that's how we had to do it. So it's a lot.
Were you flip-flopping this year between theory and pro demos? Is that how that was working?
No. So the demo kind of had both. It focused primarily on theory because theory's newer. Pro's been around 20 years. And so a lot of the folks at Cedia know who we are and what we do. And so most of what we showed was the theory products, some new ones and some legacy ones. And then at the end, we played a couple pro products. And pro introduced I don't know if your viewership knows this, but theory kind of addresses commercial and consumer at the same time, and pro has been primarily residential high-end screening rooms, so consumer but very high-end screening rooms. But pro introduced some commercial products at Infocom in 2023, and so
Cool.
we showed some of those in the demo at CEDIA as well. Because even though they have the commercial features, they're still very valuable for um, residential sort of high-end rooms, kind of that kind of stuff.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, we're going to dig into more on that front a little bit later on during the show. I wanted to start off with actually, I have something here for you to kind of kick off
Ah,
this. That's right.
young
Uh,
man, look at all that brown hair I used to have.
you've
Yeah,
aged very well, I must say.
I don't know, dude. Not to my eyes, but okay.
Well,
uh,
you know, I wanted to dig into your past a little bit and talk about kind of the beginnings of your career with Hales Design Group. If I'm not mistaken, that's what it was called. Is that correct?
that's right. Yes, in the
So,
1990s.
yeah, so lead us a little bit through what was going on at that point in your career.
Yeah, so I when I went to college, I studied mechanical engineering, intending to get into the loudspeaker business, right? So I had in high school and during my college years built a bunch of speakers for myself, and it's really what my passion was. And so, as a senior at UC Davis, my senior project, mechanical engineering project, was the design of a loudspeaker system, and so
Wow.
I used the anechoic chamber at the university to develop what would eventually become the first commercial product that I sold. And so
Hmm.
that was in 88. I think we launched Hales in 90 at CES, I believe. And so what happened was I got very early sort of traction. I was a kid. I mean, I was 22 years old, and I had the engineering degree, and so I had a solid technical background. But I was just tenacious, and I just kept sort of refining this first product until I thought it sounded super compelling. Right, very very fun to listen to, engaging. Right, and
Hmm.
so when we launched it, we were, lucky, and through the tenacity, to our benefit, a whole bunch of other people thought they sounded compelling too. And so we had a really successful very first CES show. Back then, that's kind of where audio was shown, so it's evolved now. So high-end audio is now mostly consumer shows. But back then, CES was where you did it. And so I got some coverage from the publication Stereophile and the Absolute Sound. And then what really put me on the map was Bob Harley, who was the technical editor of Stereophile back then, reviewed one of my first products and gave it a rave review. And he was using B&W 801s as his sort of reference speaker at
Hmm.
the time, and he put those in the closet. And he started to use mine.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. So between the good review and then of course he always referenced Hales every time he reviewed a CD player or a turntable or whatever, right? And so that got me on the map. And I followed it up with some other pretty good products. And so in the 90s, we enjoyed some notoriety amongst the other brands at the time. Anybody that's old enough to have been involved in audio back then might remember the brand. And so from 88 to 2000, that's what I did. And then got kind of disillusioned towards the end of the decade there.
Well, I got to ask you, you're coming out of college. So many people come out of college and have no idea what they want to do with their life. They're
Hmm.
nervous. A lot of people are moving home. I
Hmm.
mean, you're out there grinding away, creating a speaker company. Were you nervous at the time about it, or were you confident?
Well, I've always had a confidence that maybe does isn't justified, but yeah, no, not really. I mean, so I even in college, I had a business, and with what was my first business partner, and we did things locally for people. We did, I guess you could call it really sort of basic custom install kind of stuff. We had a
Mhm.
guy that wanted a console, an audio console, and in the 70s, you could buy a big piece of furniture that had speakers and a turntable and the electronics in it. And by 1990 or the late 80s, those were gone.
Mm.
And so he had us build one of those. And so I had a good time doing that. So I had already dabbled in entrepreneurship a little bit, but I was just passionate about it, right? I just loved it, right? And I'm very lucky because trust me, it's not lost on me that a lot of people, perhaps most people, don't have that passion they can pursue, and so they have to figure out what kind of job they're going to get. When they go to work, they're going to a job, right?
Yeah.
I don't have a job. I do my passion every single day, and so I'm super fortunate in that I was able to make a career out of something that I just find super fascinating, interesting, and rewarding.
Well, it definitely still shows. Seeing you at CD a couple years in a row now, you that passion just spills out still. So
That's good. Yeah.
you still got it externally.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I
Yeah.
work hard. We're a small team. We all work hard, but it's because we love what we're doing, right? And so, I'll have to get up and come in and do some work on a Sunday or whatever, and most people would grunt and groan.
Hmm.
And, I certainly wish I had more free time for sure. But when I come to the office and I'm in my lab or whatever, I'm enjoying every minute of it. So it's really not a job per se. It's like I'm able to make a living at my hobby or my passion, I guess is the
Yeah.
way to say it. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you said that at near the end of Hales Design Group, you became a little disillusioned. I actually found a quote from somebody on an old forum. I don't believe this audio forum is around anymore, but he says, I owned the Hales System 2 signatures for about 15 years. During that time, I heard nothing else that I felt was a superior speaker at any price point. Then he
Wow.
said, pity he didn't get the success he deserved.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, does that kind of tie into what you're talking about of being disillusioned? Were you feeling like the company wasn't moving forward like you wanted it to, or?
No, it wasn't that. It was I got disillusioned with the industry. The high end audio business is super quirky, right? There's a lot of snake oil and
Mm,
just nonsense that goes on, right? And we've got $50,000 speaker cables and stuff like that,
yeah.
right? So part of it was being disillusioned with the business itself, the business audiophile business, right? And then the other part was the speakers themselves were disappointing. So,
Hmm.
um, yeah, so it occurred to me. I'll repeat a story I've told on a few different other forums. In the 90s, my first daughter was born in 95, and we live about 30 minutes from Disneyland. And back then, and especially back then, you could hear a lot of unamplified music in the park, right? And so we had annual passes, and we would go take the kids to Disneyland all the time. And so I was standing there one day with my daughter, and she was about 3 or something, and I had her in this backpack that she could stand in and look around and see everything.
Oh
And
yeah.
there was a guy playing a tenor saxophone all by himself. It was just one dude, one instrument, and he was standing there, and he was in front of a big building, so he had the reflected energy from the building supporting him, but the sound was massive, and it was loud, and it was dynamic, and it was effortless, and it was engaging. And I stood there and I went, oh my god, like our hi-fi systems cannot do that, right?
Mm,
And so that's when I realized just how dynamically wrong consumer hi-fi systems are, right? And I think most people in the business and most people who buy the products don't realize it, because that's just the way they've always been and stuff. But I really went on a pursuit of dynamics after that. And so right at the end of the 2000s, I designed two products specifically aimed at preserving sort of everything that we had, which we had like really accurate timbre. Um, but I pursued dynamics. And so I designed a speaker called the Revelation 5, and I designed a big 15-inch horn speaker called the Cinema Reference. for surround sound, because surround sound was just kind of starting to become commercially a
Mm-hmm.
thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the cinema reference looked like a speaker you'd find in your commercial cinema.
Hmm.
And the Hales dealers were like, "What are you doing, dude? Like, you can't have a horn. Like, what's wrong with you?" Right? And you can't have a 15-inch two-way. Like, you can't do that and stuff. And they didn't get it. And I was like, "Don't you see how this sounds like a movie?" Right? And so in
Hmm.
2000, I got on the radar of the ownership at QSC Audio. I mean, that's for the viewers that don't know who QSC is. Back then, they had been making commercial power amplifiers for about 35 years, and they kind of dominated the power amp business. So live sound, if you went to a movie back in those days, the odds are you were listening to QSC Power, because they had the majority of the cinema business in North America.
Hmm.
And they invited me in to get them into the loudspeaker business. And so that gave me an opportunity to kind of pursue professional audio, which became fascinating to me, because I would go to movies and hear this giant, powerful sound, more like the real thing. And then I would listen to the hi-fi products, a little 6-inch two-way stand mount thing, 84 dB sensitivity and stuff, and just go, Jesus Christ, what are we doing? And so I did. I joined QSC, spent 4 years there learning all about professional audio, and then really that's what pro audio technology is kind of the marriage of Hales with the work I did at QSC.
Okay, so let's stop there for a second. This might be a good time to talk about when you say professional audio. I know a lot of people out there have heard the term pro audio versus hi-fi or consumer audio. Uh, What's making that difference ultimately, uh, mechanically speaking, from the speaker side? What's going on there?
Yeah, so I kind of categorize, there's no strict definition of these terms, but when I think of audio, I kind of think of it in three categories. Consumer audio, which is the stuff we buy in stores and Best Buy and online that we use
Hmm.
in our homes, right? Um, those speakers are traditionally cones and domes, right? Dome tweeters, or maybe a air motion transformer, super popular now. And they're in fancy boxes with wood veneers and things like that, and they're designed to
Right.
play at modest levels, moderate levels, right?
Hmm.
Then there's a category I call commercial audio, which is like the medium size, professional installations. So everything from small background music systems in retail stores, restaurants, bars, hotels, casinos, airports, blah blah blah, up to small, performing arts centers kind of thing, or House of Blues, small live venues. And then professional audio, you can kind of think of it as live sound, right? So you go
Okay.
see Taylor Swift, and she's got this giant rig. Um, and professional audio has always been very high power, very large, high power, high efficiency loudspeakers, because you're trying to get the sound to a lot of listeners, right?
Mm.
Consumer audio, you're typically trying to get the sound to a small number of listeners in a small room inside a house, right?
Hmm.
And so, yeah, they were designed to be small. They were designed to not have super high efficiency. Bandwidth and efficiency is a trade-off. So you might be surprised. I think people would be surprised to know how limited the bandwidth of professional audio systems are. Like when you say subwoofer in profession, like in a live sound, those subwoofers probably roll off at 40 hertz,
Hmm.
right? Or
Wow.
35 maybe, right? Because to get the efficiency in a package that's reasonably sized, you have to trade off bandwidth. So in hi-fi or
Hmm.
consumer, bandwidth was the priority, and then it just kind of came dogma. I mean,
Hmm.
one of my frustrations is, the audio industry, the designers aren't really looking around very much, right? Like I looked around, I went off and I spent 4 years designing commercial cinema speakers, and we did the sound system at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway,
Oh,
and I
cool.
learned a lot about a lot, and all that stuff is in my product today. So we're bringing that same thinking into product that people are buying for their homes. And if anybody's heard it, or if you read any of the reviews, you can see how it manifests itself into the performance. The speakers are insanely dynamic, and the sound is bigger, and it's more bold, and it's more thrilling, and that comes from the sort of the professional audio side. Um, the problem with professional audio historically was it didn't sound very good. Still doesn't sound very good, right? So
Hmm.
most live shows don't sound great. They
I was
don't
going to
have.
say, yeah. I mean, a lot of concerts you go to sound
Yeah,
terrible.
yeah, they sound terrible. Look, their challenge is a hard one. I had a long conversation on a podcast recently about this. What they need to do is hard. They got to get sound to a lot of people, and sometimes the people are very far away. Like if you're at an outdoor festival, Coachella or whatever, right?
Right.
You've got to throw the sound far. So there's a lot of challenges, but I think they could be doing a better job than they're doing. And so I think audiophiles dismiss that kind of style product because it never sounds good, right? And then the professionals couldn't use any of the components that consumer audio is doing because they would just all blow up. They're just not the right tool for the job, right?
Hmm.
And when I was at QSC, I was able to figure out how to make professional style speakers sound like hi-fi speakers, and
Mm,
that's really the niche we're in, right? And so the
right.
people that have been to our showroom here that I'm sitting in will testify that's kind of what we're doing.
Very cool. And that really kind of, you left QSC and transitioned over to founding what eventually became Pro Audio Technology, correct?
That's right,
Is
yeah,
that
in 2004. That's right.
2004? And so that's 20 years.
Yeah, 20. We had a 20th anniversary at CEDIA through a party. It was good fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really awesome. So I told you I wanted to ask you some questions about how you evaluate speakers, and
Hmm.
maybe this would be a good time to talk about that. It's something that I wanted to do at CEDIA this year, and it just didn't work out because, as you know, the time crunch when you're talking to somebody, it's impossible to ask a lot of these questions. But I wanted to get an idea of how kind of the pros go about evaluating speakers. And my first question is, what do you reach for? Is it music or movie content?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you will recall we played all music, right? And
Yeah.
music is much more valuable, in my opinion, at evaluating the quality of a speaker, right? For a couple reasons. One, so one of the first things I listen for is accurate instrumental timbre, right? It has to sound tonally correct. Otherwise, if there's a coloration in there, you've lost me right out of the gate, right?
Hmm.
So, and I think that's why that very first Hales loudspeaker did so well is, I made it sound like the harmonic structure of the instruments and the tonal color of the instruments and voices and things were right. They were compelling. Like when somebody plays you can play a chord on a beautifully made Taylor or Martin guitar, and it has a compelling quality to the sound, right? It's not a piece of music. It's just a single strum, but there's this compelling quality to it that comes from this tonal color I'm talking about. So the first thing I pay attention to is that. And in a movie, there is no tonal color. An explosion
Sure.
is an explosion, right?
Sure.
The other challenge with evaluating speaker quality using a surround system is there's a whole bunch of them playing at the same time, right? So
Yeah.
one of the messages we made to the audience at CDOs is like, look, we're not going to play surround sound. I know you're disappointed because a lot of people come to see Pro every year because we historically always showed these big dynamic bombastic surround systems. And I said,
Of course.
we're not doing that because we're going to play all the speakers individually so you can hear what they do. Because if we played them all at once, doing explosions and fight scenes and you really wouldn't be able to tell what they're doing. And so we
Hmm.
used music. So now, don't get me wrong. You need to listen to them and evaluate them in the surround sound context, but primarily you're going to be listening for bandwidth and dynamics and stuff like that, right? Clarity. So I always, when designing a product, all the final step is to evaluate it with stereo. And I have a whole bunch of tracks that I use,
Yeah.
some
Do you
of
want to
which go way back to the 90s. I still use some of the same tracks.
really? Can you share a couple of those with us? Do you have
Oh,
any in particular that you?
yeah. Well, so interestingly enough, this is a good tip. Are you familiar with QSound? Do you remember QSound?
No.
So, okay. So in the 90s, a company introduced this technology to create spaciousness, sort of surround sound out of stereo. It's called
Okay.
QSound, and a number of artists made records using it. Madonna has one. I think Immaculate Collection is QSound, but the one that's super good is Roger Waters' "Amused to Death."
Mm,
And all of the Q sound effects, okay, because he's throwing stuff everywhere. There's stuff behind you, there's stuff on the left and right, there's stuff way off in the distance, there's ambience. It's like surround sound, but it's just stereo.
just
And the better the system, the better the speaker, the better that effect is. It's like almost a one-to-one relationship. And so if you really want to assess a system with just single disc, Amused to Death will do that for you, because how well it does that, reproduction of the movement of the sounds and stuff will tell you. But I've got a whole list of jazz. I've got some Harry Connick Jr. cuts that are very good that I go to. I've got some audiophile recordings that I still use. I use some Radiohead
ah,
tracks, actually. Like In Rainbows has a lot of effects, and Tom York does a lot of manipulation to the sounds that make them spacious, and they positions them in space. And there's a lot of layering going on, so you can actually glean a lot from like 15 step off of In Rainbows. There's a ton of stuff going on in there where you can evaluate almost every category of performance of a loudspeaker. But to say I have just a handful is wrong. I mean, my listening test playlist is hundreds of
pretty much
songs.
endless. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And look, the streaming services help me find more, right? Like we use a lot of yellow. Um,
Ah,
like
yeah. Well, that's a
a lot
classic.
of those, yeah, a lot of those tracks you heard at Cedia were yellow, right? In fact, the,
Hmm.
the cut that I played on every system was a yellow cut.
Right. Yeah. They're very dynamic in their
Dynamic,
presentation.
they're clean, they sound good, they're very well produced,
Hmm.
and yeah, not compressed. Yeah, they're good. Compression is my pet peeve.
Mm.
You know, music mastering and recording engineers, keep your hands off the compressors.
There you have it. The final
Yeah,
word. I
yeah.
love it. So
Nobody's
when
listening
you're
to me, but
listening, when you go about listening, are you evaluating at reference, what we would call reference level, or are you looking across a range of volumes?
yeah, so I do it all. So I'll start
You do
with
it all.
intimate music. A demo cut that I've used several times is literally just two acoustic guitars and a female voice, very beautiful female voice. And I play that at, sort of realistic levels. It wouldn't be very loud, right? A woman singing and, very delicately played guitars. But then I'll, evaluating the same speaker, I'll grab a track from Yellow and I'll turn it up loud, like really loud. Like, some of the pro speakers can easily, comfortably do 110 to 120 dB at your chair.
Yeah.
And so we'll do that, and it stays clean and clear, and it doesn't get fatiguing and stuff. And that's part of our claim to fame. And so we do listen to all of that.
Hmm. Yeah. Awesome. I mean, I find that there are many speakers when you play them at lower volume levels, you begin to lose a lot of that detail
That's
in the
true.
sound.
Hmm.
It happens on both ends of the spectrum when they get really loud, but also when
Yep.
they're down really low. So,
You just described the problem with consumer products right there, right? They can't do either. They can't do loud, and they lose their resolution when they're going soft because they're so inefficient.
mm.
Like I keep my eye on the consumer market, because who knows what'll happen next year. But some of these speakers are like 84 dB, 82 dB. sensitivity. And when you're to put things in perspective, a dome tweeter is roughly well, what would you guess the efficiency of a dome tweeter percent wise? I don't mean voltage sensitivity. I mean, if you put 100 watts of electrical power in, how many acoustic watts do you think you get from a dome tweeter?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm sure a lot is lost.
You get about 1 watt.
Oh, 1 watt?
Yes, a dome tweeter is about 1 to maybe 2% efficient.
Wow.
So that means a consumer speaker could better be described as a toaster than it could a speaker, right? Because
It doesn't make
100
sense though. What?
100 watts
Oh,
comes in and 99 of it gets converted into heat, and 1 watt
it,
comes out the front of the speaker.
that's amazing to
Yes,
think about.
that's
Um,
how inefficient they are.
wow.
Yeah,
I mean,
so a
is
high
there
efficient.
widespread use basically due to cost, essentially? Is that
Yeah, and the listening habits and stuff. Look, if you're listening to background music while you're making dinner, it's fine, right? Nobody
yeah.
cares. If you're doing critical listening and you want it to stay clean and clear when it's not being played very loudly, you can't have an inefficient speaker like that.
Yeah.
So when people walk into our showroom here for a demo, the first thing they hear is they're greeted with a pair of our pendant loudspeakers in the lobby, and
Right.
they're not being played very loudly, but they're crystal clear and clean and delicate, and they stay that way because they're highly efficient. So to put things in perspective, that cinema reference speaker that I made back in '98 at Hales, that used a fairly large horn and a big compression driver, um, the efficiency of the horn driver combo was more like about 40%, right?
Mm.
So a consumer speaker might be, let's say, 1 to 5% efficient. Some big professional speakers are more like 30 to 40% efficient, which still is inefficient, but radically more efficient than a consumer speaker.
For sure. And we have a question here. Do you measure your speakers and publish the results? And the
Ab,
answer says
abs,
yes.
Absolutely. I'll share, if we get a chance, I'll share the Theory website with you. You can see all the measurements. Otherwise, if you just go to theoryprofessional.com, and any one of the product pages, if you scroll down, as you go down, you'll see measurements. We publish probably the most extensive measurements of any brand that I'm aware of,
Mm.
anyway. And all the measurements are on the cut sheets, but it's also right there on the website. So have a look, because we have extensive data.
Right. Yeah. Let me, since we're getting into talking about theory a little bit, these beauties are something that you guys were showing off at CEDIA this year.
Yeah,
Um,
hiding off. Yeah.
yeah, actually, speaking of that, there you go. That's what it looked like at CEDIA this year. You had these. Yeah, first off, I have to ask: was this your idea to hide these behind
It,
curtains and then
it,
surprise everybody?
it was, yeah. So, the performance is pretty crazy, right? And so, we like to, when we do the demos, to try to keep them interesting. We always try to have something novel that you're going to remember, right? And in
Hmm.
this case, we played this big dynamic, dance club kind of sound almost, right? And then we revealed after the fact that it was the landscape product that you were listening to.
Right.
Um, yeah, and everybody remembers that, right?
Honestly, Paul, when you are in there listening to what you're hearing, you're just thinking of, just some super sexy speaker, right? At least in my head, I'm like, there's got to be something crazy in here. And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't figure out
Mm-hmm.
what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And you pull back landscape speakers.
Yeah,
It's really just amazing.
it was fun. So
Yeah.
I did this 43 times, right? So I got to watch the reaction of 43 rooms. We had about 50 chairs in there. There's like maybe a little less, 44 chairs or something. And most of the demos were completely full. And every time I put I said you were listening to, and then I showed the bollards, right? And the reaction of the room was fantastic because most people just laughed. They're like, "What?" And
Right.
yeah, no, it's super gratifying to do that. And look, there's a good reason why our landscape speakers sound that way, is because we won't release anything that doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So I promised them, I kind of teased them at both Infocom and at CD in 2023. I said, look, we're going to enter landscape. And I made the promise at the time. I said, look, we won't do it unless it sounds like this, because we had just played a room full of product. And so we did it and we revealed it. And one of your colleagues from a different website, I caught him in the hall afterwards and he looked at me. He goes, well, you were using a Storm processor. So you were using Dirac, right? And I'm like, no, that's just how they sound. And he goes, holy F. Like, I'm not going to say it. I don't know if YouTube will kick me out or whatever, but his response was, holy F. Like, he couldn't wrap his head around that that's just what the speakers sound like, right?
Wow.
So
yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah,
one of
that
my
is really
pet peeves.
amazing to note, by the way. I mean, you're showing it off, and you did, I believe, say during the presentation that you were not using any kind of room correction.
No EQ at all. I mean, most rooms I did mention, we had one parametric filter at 40 hertz because that room was square, right? So
Right.
that room was 29 by 29 by 15. It was the second worst shape you could have. We went in there, we deployed 10 different systems, or I think 10 different systems, all different locations, different style products, and they all sounded the same, right? And so that's proof that you don't need room correction. We were in the worst room you can imagine, and we still made good sound out of everything.
Oh, yeah.
And that's because if you get the speakers right, you don't want room correction. It will make your speakers less right. So this is a massive topic. It goes against the thinking of the majority of the industry, and I've been talking about this for years, but I know that the guys at Harman agree with me. I mean, if your speakers are good, you don't want to mess with them with room correction, right?
Sure. Yeah. And folks, everyone that's watching, you can actually watch the entire presentation on our YouTube channel if you'd like, and you can experience what I experienced when I was sitting there listening to all of these amazing speakers. And you can experience that reveal moment where Paul pulls back the curtain and says, hey, this is what you've been listening to.
Yeah, everybody, look, the little 6-inch ceiling speaker is a crowd pleaser, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
we play a pair of ceiling speakers, and at the office here at our showroom, we play one. And I fill this massive 60 by 60 by 28 foot space with a single ceiling speaker, and people's heads explode. They're like, how is that doing that? And it's doing that because I've spent 43 years trying to figure out how to make it do that, right? So if after 43 years I didn't know what I was doing, I should probably consider a career change, right? So we're just able to get we're able to get more sound out of a typical package than most of the competition, right? And that's kind of what people, I think, remember. And then the consistency of the sound, like all the systems sounded the same. They just get bigger and more dynamic, but the timbre is exactly the same, even in a bad room, right?
Being a more of a commercial facing product, are Theory landing in or like restaurants and amusement parks?
That's
Or
exactly where they're landing. Yeah.
okay,
So we've got a lot of sports venues.
sports venues.
Yeah, so we're I don't know that I'm allowed to talk about them, but
Okay.
yeah, a number of NFL stadiums, amusement parks, very, very famous amusement parks. The Ballards may or may not have been at the request of amusement park.
Can
And
I put in a request?
yeah,
Can you reach out to the Baltimore Orioles, please, as
Ish,
they're
do they
getting
need
ready
good?
to revamp Camden Yards in
Okay,
Baltimore, and one of the biggest complaints from everybody is the audio system there. It's, it's basically 30 some years old, and
right.
it sounds terrible. They tried to tweak it up this year. It
Hmm.
just doesn't sound right. I would be smitten to have you bring
Yeah,
your speakers in there.
Yeah, we couldn't do the main sound reinforcement, but on all the concourses and in all
Yeah.
the restaurants and in all the lounges and boxes, that's where you'll find theory, right?
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, restaurants, sports venues, theme parks, cruise ships,
Hmm.
and we're just kind of getting started in that end of the business. But I kind of joked on a recent video we made. I think it's on the Theory website. You could watch it. That I we founded Theory in part so that my dinners sound better when I go out to dinner because I'm tired of hearing crappy sound
Right.
ruining my dinner. Right.
Right.
So yeah, it's a little bit out of selfishness.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and you guys launched pretty much during COVID, right?
Yeah.
Which
Oh,
must
right
have
at the
it's like
start of COVID. Yeah.
probably the worst possible time to launch
Hmm.
for commercial
Absolutely.
facing products. Um,
Absolutely. That was a challenge. We started
yeah.
shipping in January of 2020, and in March of 2020, the world shut down. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
really
so that's why
tough.
we're kind of late to the commercial space. We were supposed to be at Infocom in 2021, and we didn't get there until 2023 because of COVID.
Hmm. And let's not forget about these beauties. I pulled a couple off our news article that we had when you guys launched these just before
Hmm.
CDA, I believe, correct?
Hmm.
So
We launched those at Infocom actually.
Infocom, okay.
Mhm.
And these folks are the Pro Audio Technology. And Paul, you're going to have to help me out on how they fit into your ecosystem of speakers.
Yeah, so really, these were designed to be multi-use in commercial applications. So they can be used as portable speakers. You can wheel them in and stand them up and do your wedding or do your dance competition or do your big corporate meeting or whatever. Also installed. So the same speaker will do both. That theme of being sort of being able to be used in a lot of different applications. Is true of both the Theory product and the Pro product. So, like for example, the Theory Ballard landscape speaker that you heard is the ceiling speaker inside a housing, right? And
Hmm.
the pendant loudspeakers, the hanging loudspeakers, are the ceiling speaker in a pendant housing. So
That's
these
really cool.
these pro speakers
Yeah.
are kind of the same thing. You can use them in permanent install, or you can use them in, DJs can throw them in their trunk and go to their gig or whatever. This is an evolution, and how this happened is um, the showroom we have here is both brands. We have a ton of audio here, and we had a whole bunch of commercial folks in. So consultants on the commercial side, the more serious systems are designed by audio video consultants, and then it goes out and then to bid, and then the different AV integrators bid on it and install it. But the AV integrators
Mm.
are not usually doing the design. On the smaller projects, they do the design, but on the more sophisticated ones, there's a consultant usually. And so we brought a bunch of these folks in and we said, hey, look, this is our new brand Theory. And oh, by the way, do you want to hear Pro? And they said yes. And then they all said, oh my God, like we need this in our world, right? Because the Pro brand has been making very high output products for residential screening rooms where space is tight. So we have a
Hmm.
lot of products that are shallow. And like that speaker at the bottom there, that thing is only the consumer version of that's only 6 inches deep, but it goes from 22 hertz to 23K in 6 inches of
Wait,
depth.
6 inches. So it's an on
Yes.
wall,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah. Most of these
Uh
are built in and hidden behind stretch fabric. So even in the
huh.
biggest installs, they don't want to give up floor space. So to put things in perspective, that speaker
Mm.
is almost 6 feet tall. It's two 12-inch woofers, two very high output 8-inch mid ranges, and a compression driver. To talk about efficiency, if a consumer speaker is 84 to 87 dB per 1 watt, the low frequency section of that is 102 dB per 1 watt. The mid range is 100 and let me think about this. I think the mid range is 102
Wow.
dB per watt, and then the tweeter is 108. Right, so it's a
Wow.
massively powerful speaker that's very compact, and
Hmm.
so there we have a museum in Long Beach that has these Pro speakers. They have this outdoor courtyard that they use for events, and they rent it out. It's about, I don't know, 120 feet wide and maybe 90 feet deep or something. And they have a Pro sound reinforcement system, and it sounds amazing. So you've heard our sound, right?
Hmm.
So you don't normally associate that with live music, but that's exactly what this place sounds like. is it
Wow.
sounds like a hi-fi system that just goes loud like a sound reinforcement system. And so, going back to a quick story at QSC, we did a shootout before we were even in the speaker business. People even didn't even know we were working on speakers. We did a shootout at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway against all the brands, JBL, Electro Voice, Community, blah, blah, blah. And we won. And we won because I made this 200-foot wide hi-fi system, right? And then when we, actually sold them the system, we made it 2.5 miles long.
Wow.
So I had a 2.5 mile long hi-fi system. And so that's really what Pro is doing. And these particular models are that. And so it's
Mm.
targeting, if Theory tops out at like, like in a football stadium, it would top out at like the concourse and the boxes and the smaller areas, right? These Pro speakers could do more of the sound reinforcement part of a arena or a larger performing arts center or something like that.
Hmm. Pretty awesome. I it's and when you go experience that in person, you know, how does that make you feel? I mean, those are your babies, right? That are out there performing in the world. Is it gratifying, or is it kind of like that's just one project on to the next?
No. That it's super gratifying. In fact, that's, I think, what partially inspired me to start Theory was the most fun I had at QSC was when I would go into a restaurant or I'd go into a smaller venue like that and see the products that I had designed and hear the sound and go, oh my God, that sounds amazing. And it's rewarding when, you see your hard work being used and enjoyed by others, right? So one of the
Yeah.
very first time that happened is, I'm kind of a car guy, so I've had all these sort of, fancy cars over the years, and I got invited to this Cadillac event. Cadillac was introducing the CTSV or something, and they had an event where they were shooting out against a Maserati and a 911, I think, and stuff. And so this was very early on, and I went into this giant tent that was it was at an air base, and they had this giant tent, and they had all the propaganda in there and disco lights and everything. And I walked in and I'm registering and I hear the sound in there. I'm like, oh, this sounds pretty good. And I walk around the corner, I walk around the wall, and it's a bunch of QSC speakers that I had designed in there. So it's super fun to do that.
Yeah.
My daughter just texted me a video yesterday from a very famous amusement park of a Theory speaker. You couldn't see it. It was built in behind this louver, so it was hidden because most of the speakers in this theme park are hidden. But she texted the video of it playing its little bit on that
Oh, that's cool.
attraction. Yeah, it was very cool. So
That's awesome. How did she recognize it? Did she?
well, she knew it was on that ride,
Okay, got it. Okay.
and I told her where she could find it, and then so she made a quick video, and at the time it was a narrator speaking, so it was just a male voice with some background music,
Hmm.
but even over the video you could hear the robustness of the male voice and the clarity of the male voice and stuff. So it's very cool when you see stuff out in the wild.
That's really awesome. Well, Paul,
Yeah.
listen, we have about 2 minutes left because I know you've
Hmm.
got to go for your next part of your day. But I have one more question for you. I
Hmm.
asked you about this at CEDIA.
Hmm.
What's the status of this beast? I don't even know what else to call it. It looks almost like a human-sized coffin.
Yeah.
But this is an infrasonic subwoofer.
That's right. Yeah, so we talked about this a bit at CEDIA. That product is probably not going to go into production because the acoustic part of it is done in very good, but we don't have at the time right now access to an amplifier powerful enough for it
Uh-huh.
in a way that's easy to get the signal in. So it needs to fit within the Pro and Theory ecosystem. And so we have these loudspeaker controllers that have analog in and SPDIF in and Dante and AES67 in, but
Mhm.
we couldn't find a power amp big enough. We have some power amps that provide 3,400 watts per woofer. There's 221s in there. So it'd be 6,800 watts.
Okay.
But we can't get the signal into it in a way and do the processing in our loudspeaker controller, not an elegant way. So I have a different solution that I'm working on right now. In fact, we'll be prototyping them next week. that is both physically easier to integrate, much lighter. That thing weighs like 400, or I mean,
Yeah.
sorry, 560
Oh
pounds.
my gosh.
Um, and it has a 30-inch driver. So uh, the 30-inch driver has almost exactly the same surface area of 221s. So it's got the
Hmm.
same surface area, but it's a single driver, and the power amp is a super unique solution. The transducer is a super unique transducer, and we don't have that problem. We can process the signal in the way we need to and throw enough power at the box. So, next year, Cedia, come see us and you'll see it.
Awesome. And folks, we were going to have to end our chat with Paul tonight, but that is a tasty little morsel that hopefully will whet your appetite for just about a year from now. We will be visiting you again out in Denver, I believe. Correct?
That'd be right. Yeah, Denver.
I think it's Denver again.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, listen, Paul, thank you so much for hanging out with us for almost an hour tonight. Really appreciate it. And look forward to having you on again because I think there's a lot more that we can dig into.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is fun. If you want to really go down the rabbit hole, let's talk about room correction sometime, and that whole thinking and stuff. Because I think I can shine some light on some of that stuff that might be valuable to your listeners.
Fantastic. Let's figure out a time to do it.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Todd.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you, Paul, and everybody that has joined. I think we had a record audience tonight based on the numbers that I've been seeing popping up on our screen. So I really appreciate everybody tuning in to hang out with us. And we will see you next time on AV Nirvana Live. If you enjoy content like this, hit like, subscribe.